The 2016 campaign is in full force, but Delaware is left out. Can we change that? This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. So you live in Delaware, you watch all the excitement of the primaries and the caucuses, and you think to yourself, why not us? I'll ask that question to our next guest. Paul Brewer is director of the Center for Political Communication at the University of Delaware. Welcome back. Thank you very much for being here, Paul. Why not us? Why can't we move up the Delaware primary? We're the first state. Wouldn't it make sense for us to be the first primary?
Yeah, so the primary calendar is one of these weird things in American politics that just sort of grew on its own. And one of the things that makes it complicated is that there are different people who have a say in how it goes on. So the states have some say in how they do primaries, but then the national parties also have a say in how it all works out. And so Delaware has tried in the past. In 1996, Delaware tried to compete with New Hampshire to be one of the first primaries in the state, but the national parties punished Delaware for it and said, basically, your primary doesn't count because you're getting in New Hampshire's way.
Now, in the past, they've actually taken away delegates.
Exactly. That's the stick that the national parties use. And what the primaries and caucuses do is they choose delegates. So if no delegates get chosen, or if your delegate count gets cut in half, like they did to Florida a while back, well, then that's the punishment for the states for not playing ball.
And let's explain that for a second, the punishment of delegates, why that's such a big deal. Because the very people that are moving the primary are the people that would be most likely to be delegates and get to go to the convention. So what they're saying to them is, we're taking your ticket away for the convention. You don't get to go. Is that fair?
Yes, that's part of it, and part of it's just not getting a say at the convention. And other things happen at the convention too. They vote on the party platform. They help decide the rules for the next time around. So not having those seats at the convention, it's not something that states want.
But we don't get a say now. Delaware doesn't get a say now. It's almost inconsequential because we come so late in the calendar and it's such a small state. You'd think there'd be a bigger push. Aren't you surprised that there's not a bigger push?
I am surprised. Iowa and New Hampshire especially, they've got a stranglehold on the process, and they're sort of they play chicken with the candidates and say, if you don't play ball with us, then maybe our voters aren't going to support you. At least that's the way they present it to the candidates. So there's another plan that's been proposed, the Delaware plan, nice name, where all of the small states would go first. And that was pitched back in 2000. It would take effect in 2004. But the national party shot it down at the convention. So there have been attempts.
What is it? What is the stranglehold that Iowa and New Hampshire has on the political process? Because it doesn't seem to make sense at first flush, because they certainly don't represent the rest of the country. They're much different. Iowa's much different than, say, New York or down south, and so is New Hampshire. Not to mention, demographically, they don't match the rest of the country. So why them?
One reason is that they set their dates early, back when primaries and caucuses didn't matter as much. So it was until the 1970s that the process was really chosen through these primaries and caucuses. Before that, some caucuses and primaries mattered, but the real decision was at the national conventions. So they got that early edge, and then they've tenaciously fought to keep that advantage. And not that many delegates are chosen in Iowa and New Hampshire, but what happens is, because they go first, the winner gets all this media coverage, and they're covered as a winner. And that makes voters pay attention to candidates who win those states. And that makes donors pay attention to candidates who win those states. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Do well in the early states, do well in the rest of the country. Don't do well in the early states, drop out.
Right, but it is not representative at all of the rest of the country. I mean, it's an antiquated process that for some reason seems difficult to change. I can't remember who said it. Was Mark Twain who said, the longer a tradition's been around, the less it makes sense. And it seems to be, in this case, it is absolutely the case with Iowa and New Hampshire. And yet, because of what they have, they make so much money in hotels and in restaurants and in media buys and in attention, and also, and tell me if this is true, the whole thing with ethanol. That's because Iowa is the first caucus state, right?
Yes, so it's heresy in Iowa to go against ethanol. I think Ted Cruz did it and survived, but there was a lot of talk that was going to cost him votes in Iowa.
Right, and so you have political power, and Delaware now has none of that.
None. So Delaware goes on April 26th, but 4 other states go the same day. And so Rhode Island, you know, about on the same level as Delaware, then Connecticut and Pennsylvania and Maryland. And so even on its day, Delaware may be overshadowed by some of these bigger states that are also choosing delegates the same day.
Can you want to hear my theory on the whole thing? My theory, of being a media person, Delaware doesn't have a media market. They're covered by Philadelphia and they're covered by Baltimore. So if you want to make buys to attract voters in Delaware, you've now got to buy Philadelphia, which is going to go up into South Jersey, and you're going to waste a lot of the target audience, and you got to go down to Baltimore to get South Delaware, and it's just too expensive. And until Delaware gets his own media market, they'll never get an early primary. What do you think?
That's a pretty good theory. Now, New Hampshire is kind of in the same boat in that there's no big urban media market in New Hampshire, but maybe I think the Boston media market reaches out into New Hampshire. I think it may also reflect Delaware going the same time as Maryland and Pennsylvania. Another solution to the problem is regional primaries.
That's why it's Maryland and Pennsylvania on the same day, because of the media buy. That has to be it. New Hampshire does have WMUR, which they have. They're one TV station. They don't really have their own market like Delaware, but you know, WHYY, this show, I think there's some smaller TV stations down in Delaware, but for the most part, these Delaware's dominated by Baltimore and Philadelphia, but we'll talk about another time. It's another one of my pet peeves, not just the primary, but this. But you don't see this changing anytime soon.
I don't see it changing anytime soon. On the bright side for this time around, it looks like at least on one side, potentially both sides, there may still be a competition going on when Delaware votes. So Delaware could actually play a small but important part in the nomination process this time around, because there's even talk there could be a contested convention this time around. In that scenario, every delegate
I hear
counts.
this every election.
I know, and I want to see it one time in my life. I think this is what you really need for a contested convention is 3 viable candidates. So it's not going to happen on the Democratic side because there's only 2 candidates right now.
Well, Hillary's got some problems.
But if there are only 2, one of them has to get a majority. On the Republican side, though, you could very easily envision 3 or 4 candidates going all the way through April and no candidate showing up at the convention with the majority of the delegates.
See, now we're running out of time, but you're getting up to my other conspiracy theory about Hillary dropping out and Joe Biden getting into the race. We'll talk about that the next time you're up.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming in. Paul Brewer, Director of the Center for Political Communication at the University of Delaware. We'll be right back with more of the Delaware Way.